The year is 2026, and China has decided to invade Taiwan. That's the scenario in this war game being run by a think tank in Washington, D.C. For decades, Beijing has threatened to bring Taiwan under its control and hasn't ruled out a full-scale invasion to do so. That's why security officials and analysts use war games like this one to simulate different scenarios and see how a conflict could play out.
But when we put this invasion scenario together, our argument was that this was not necessarily going to be the future, but because of the Chinese military buildup and its rhetoric, it was plausible to look at invasion.
Mark Kansian's a retired colonel from the U.S. Marine Corps and one of the leads of this project. He says concerns over a possible war in the Taiwan Strait motivated him to develop this war game to provide insight on how to both prevent and prepare for a potential conflict.
That there's tremendous interest in Taiwan and a possible U.S.-China conflict over Taiwan. So the opportunity to provide an analysis, a war game that could look at this in depth over many iterations, many different scenarios arose, and that's where this project came from. So the United States can use Kadena.
There are 3 boards on the table, one that shows Chinese forces, one with a map of Taiwan, and another with U.S. and Japan forces. The game uses different colored pieces to represent the different militaries and their weapon systems.
What you see here is a map of Taiwan, and the green units are the Taiwanese army. This is where they actually are. You can see that most of their combat power is up in the north, near the capital.
The game is set up to align each military's pieces with its arsenal, and with a move from China, the game begins. Each turn or roll of the dice translates to just over 3 days of real-life conflict. In this demonstration, Mark and his team are playing out the base case scenario, or what they say is most likely to happen, and the simulation makes 4 assumptions. Number 1, China has decided to launch an all-out amphibious invasion. Number 2, Taiwan resists vigorously. Number 3, the U.S. intervenes immediately. And 4, Japan allows the U.S. to operate from bases within its territory. China is about to conduct one of the largest amphibious invasions in history. The attack starts with missile strikes on not just Taiwan, but also neighboring countries like Japan.
Very often the Chinese will attack the Japanese on the first or second turn. When they see what's happening here, U.S. forces forward deployed, they'll attack then Kadena, and if they figure, well, okay, if we're going to go after Kadena, and if we're going to bring the Japanese into the war, we might as well go after their other bases and their ships also.
The U.S. and Japan lose dozens of aircraft and a handful of ships, as many Japanese bases near Taiwan are targeted. After the pieces are moved and losses recorded, it's now Team U.S. and Japan's turn to make their move. Even with the U.S. caught off guard by the attack, it's still able to inflict a significant amount of damage to the invading Chinese force.
Okay. So on the first turn, when the United States really isn't able to bring a lot of combat power to bear, they've still been able to sink 12 Chinese ships. 12, and with 3 more here, that comes out to be about 18.
Okay.
So the Chinese are taking a lot of casualties over time.
During the next few turns, Team China manages to blockade Taiwan and lands troops on the southern beaches of Taiwan. They also sink a U.S. aircraft carrier and target more U.S. forces, but this time on the island of Guam, which is home to one of the largest U.S. military bases in the Western Pacific.
It's a balancing act of having the presence, right, as a deterrent, but at the same time recognizing that, you know, if Guam isn't, you know, on the top of the target list, you know, then obviously we're not strategizing properly, but, you know, it is expected that Guam will get struck pretty early.
In as little as 2 weeks, thousands of people have died and dozens of ships and aircraft from both sides have been destroyed. The team here has played this base case scenario dozens of times, and the results are usually the same.
Our finding is that the United States and the coalition can maintain an autonomous and democratic Taiwan. So in that sense, they win. On the other hand, we note that this comes at very high cost. The United States loses hundreds of aircraft, dozens of ships. The Taiwanese infrastructure is wrecked.
While the results are grim, the war game has revealed some important lessons on what the U.S. can do to better prepare itself. One of the most urgent tasks is speeding up delivery of U.S.-made weapon systems. Taiwan is still waiting on more than $19 billion worth of U.S. weapons, many of which have been delayed since 2019.
Once the war begins, you can't get weapons and munitions into Taiwan. Unlike in Ukraine. Like the Poland situation. Right. And with Ukraine, the war began. The United States and NATO and many other countries have been flowing weapons and munitions into Ukraine through Poland. What that means for Taiwan is that it has to have all of the weapons and munitions that it needs for at least the first month or two.
While it is impossible to predict a war, the team at CSIS say that both the U.S. and Taiwan must be prepared for the worst-case scenario. And so as they continue their work, the focus is less on the results and more on the lesson that if this game becomes a reality, no one really wins. Devin, Tsai, Tsai, and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.